Snow had covered the old mine road so completely it looked as if no one had passed there in years. But Scout refused his food, ran into the darkness, and led a former Navy SEAL toward a sound beneath the frozen ground. An 81-year-old miner was still alive below a collapsed weighhouse, waiting beside a rusted air pipe. Saving him should have ended the story. Instead, his warning pointed toward midnight tankers, poisoned wells, and a town that depended on the same company it feared. Levi would soon have to decide whether truth was worth risking jobs, heat, and the last bond he had with his brother. Tell us where you're watching from, then like, comment, and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Tales reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Snow made Laurel Fork brighter after dark. It lay over the Appalachian ridges in long white folds, softening the abandoned logging roads, the rusted fences, and the black shoulders of the pines. Moonlight rested on every branch. From the porch of Levi Barrett's cabin, the world looked clean enough to forgive itself. Levi knew better. At 54, he had learned that winter covered things. It did not absolve them. He stood beneath the lean-to beside his workshop, fastening a new brace beneath the roof while snow tapped against the shoulders of his canvas jacket. He was 6 feet tall, broad through the back, with the dense strength of a man who still lifted engines, split oak, and worked with tools too stubborn for delicate hands. His angular face was clean-shaven, his jaw firm, his nose slightly crooked from an old break. Brown-ash hair, silvered at the temples and along one narrow streak above his forehead, was cut short at the sides. A red carpenter's pencil rested behind his ear. Below the lean-to, a portable generator sat open beneath a work lamp, its metal housing dark with grease. Repairing it had paid for groceries and part of the propane bill. The owner lived 40 miles away, which suited Levi. Machines came with damaged parts, not complicated histories. Inside the cabin, Scout's untouched supper waited beside the stove. That was wrong. The 8-year-old German shepherd rarely ignored food, especially when venison scraps were mixed through it. Scout stood instead at the edge of the porch, staring toward the old mine road beyond the trees. His black saddle spread unevenly across his shoulders and back, dark as coal dust against the honey-gold fur of his legs and chest. Silver had begun to frost his muzzle. His right ear, marked by a small V-shaped notch, leaned forward while the left stood rigid. "Truck again?" Levi asked. For several weeks, heavy engines had moved somewhere beyond the ridge after midnight. The sound came faintly through the trees. Low gears, strained axles, then silence. Scout always heard them before Levi did. Tonight, there was no engine. Scout barked once, not the deep warning he used for strangers, not the sharp challenge he gave foxes near the chicken wire. This bark carried urgency without anger. Levi set down the drill. Scout ran off the porch, crossed 20 yards of snow, then stopped and looked back. His amber eyes caught the work light. Beneath the right one, a pale patch of fur shaped like a falling drop made his expression seem permanently concerned. "I heard you," Scout barked again. Levi looked toward the dark road. For 2 years, he had built a life around not going in that direction. Cole Mercy lay on the other side of Laurel Fork, 25 minutes by truck and considerably farther in memory. His foster father, Hollis Barrett, was buried there. So was the last decent conversation Levi had shared with Clay Varden, the foster brother who had remained when Levi left and made choices neither man could forgive. The town had churches, debts, and a talent for remembering exactly enough of a man's history to use it against him. Levi pulled on his field jacket anyway. He slipped a flashlight, first aid kit, compact radio, rope, and 2 chemical warming packs into a canvas bag. Old training taught him to prepare before understanding. Experience had taught him that trouble rarely waited for explanations. Scout was already at the tree line. They followed the old road through the woods. Snow came midway up Levi's boots in places, filling the ruts left by vehicles too heavy for the neglected track. The forest smelled of pine resin, frozen earth, and wood smoke drifting from homes below the ridge. Scout moved with his nose low. Age had made him more deliberate, not less capable. He no longer wasted motion. When he stopped, it was because something mattered. Half a mile down the road, he found a line of footprints. The prints were narrow, uneven, and close together. Whoever had made them had been moving cautiously. One heel dragged more heavily than the other. Levi crouched and brushed snow from the edge of a print. "Older man," he murmured. "Bad left knee." Scout pushed his nose into the powder beside a thorn bush and pulled free a gray wool glove. Levi recognized it. Amos Tully wore mismatched gloves every winter, claiming matching pairs encouraged carelessness. He was 81, retired from surveying coal seams, and lived alone near Mercy Row with an elderly cat named Morrow. Levi had repaired Amos's furnace the previous January. The old man had watched him work, corrected his estimate of the house's foundation angle, and paid him in cash plus 3 jars of beans he insisted were better than money once the bank surrendered. Levi picked up the glove. Scout had already started forward. The footprints led toward a derelict weighhouse near the old Tully No. 4 mine. Its roof sagged beneath the snow, and one wall leaned away from the building as though trying to escape. Coal companies had abandoned the place decades ago, but remnants of its machinery still protruded from the hillside. Rusted cables, bent rails, and ventilation pipes rising through the weeds like the chimneys of buried houses. A section of the weighhouse floor had collapsed. Levi's flashlight found broken planks hanging over a black opening. A cane lay near the edge. "Amos!" No answer came from below. Scout circled the building, moving past the collapsed floor toward a rusted ventilation pipe several yards uphill. He stopped there, barked into the open mouth of the pipe, then lowered himself flat against the snow, his chest pressed to the ground. Levi had seen that posture before. Scout used it when listening beneath fallen timber or frozen creek banks, allowing vibration to travel through bone. The dog scratched once beside the pipe, then stopped. Levi knelt and placed one gloved hand against the metal. At first, he heard only the hollow movement of air. Then came 3 faint knocks. Levi removed his glove and pressed his ear to the frozen pipe. "Amos!" A long silence followed. "Barrett?" The voice arrived thin and distorted. "That you?" Relief moved through Levi so sharply it almost hurt. "It's me. Scout found you." "Of course he did." Amos coughed. "Dog's always been smarter than you." Levi closed his eyes for half a second. The old man was conscious. Conscious meant options. What happened? Morrow got under the weighhouse, heard him crying. Floor gave out. Amos paused to catch his breath. "Beams across my leg. Can't move it." "Any bleeding?" "Not that I can tell." "Chest pain? Trouble breathing?" "Only when people ask too many questions." Levi almost smiled. He took out his phone. One weak bar appeared and vanished. He climbed several yards uphill until the signal steadied, then called the county mine rescue volunteer line and emergency dispatch. He gave the location, described the collapsed floor, the suspected technical chamber below, and warned them about the old tunnel connection. When he returned, Scout had not moved. Levi tied a small water bottle and an activated warming pack to a cord. The ventilation pipe narrowed lower down, but Amos managed to pull both items through. "Rescue crew is coming," Levi called. "Don't try to lift the beam." "I spent 43 years telling fools not to move timber they didn't understand." "Then tonight should feel familiar." "That your attempt at comfort?" "It's what you're getting." The first rescue trucks arrived 40 minutes later, their headlights moving through the snowfall like slow lanterns. The volunteers did not rush blindly into the opening. They stabilized the remaining floor, tested the air, examined old mine maps, and opened a safer access point along the foundation wall. Levi stayed near the ventilation pipe. He kept Amos talking. They discussed ordinary things, because ordinary things gave the mine somewhere safe to stand. Amos complained about Morrow's habit of sleeping in clean laundry. Levi described the generator waiting in pieces at his workshop. Amos criticized the machine's manufacturer without knowing the model. Scout listened to every exchange. Snow gathered across his back until Levi brushed it away. The dog refused the blanket a rescuer offered. He would allow it beneath his body, but he would not move far enough from the pipe for anyone to spread it properly. Nearly 2 hours into the rescue, Amos stopped answering. Levi called his name. Nothing. He leaned closer to the pipe. Amos. Only wind moved below. One of the rescuers looked up from the foundation opening. We're almost through. Levi struck the pipe twice with his knuckles. Amos, answer me. Scout rose. His old hind legs trembled once beneath him. He pressed his nose to the pipe, inhaled, then released a low sound deep in his chest. It was not panic. It was insistence. The dog lifted one paw and struck the metal. A faint knock answered from below. Levi exhaled. There you are. Was resting my eyes, Amos whispered. You can rest them when Meredith tells you. Bossy woman. She'll enjoy hearing that. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it changed the night. Until then, Levi had been performing familiar tasks, assessing, organizing, keeping fear in manageable pieces. But when silence had filled that pipe, something older had opened inside him, the memory of waiting for voices that never returned. Scout had heard the difference before Levi admitted it. The dog leaned against his knee. Levi rested a hand on the warm place behind Scout's torn ear. I'm still here, Amos said faintly. Levi looked into the darkness beneath the snow. So are we. Shortly before dawn, the rescuers reached Amos. They lifted the beam with pneumatic bags, secured his leg, and brought him through the reinforced opening on a rigid stretcher. He was smaller than Levi remembered. His long face was gray with cold white mustache, damp beneath his nose, but his pale blue-gray eyes remained alert beneath a crooked wool cap. His first words were not about his leg. Somebody find my cat. Morrow was discovered 20 minutes later in a drainage culvert beside the weigh house. A firefighter reached in with heavy gloves and withdrew a furious bundle of smoke-gray fur. The cat responded to rescue by biting the glove, insulting everyone present in a gravelly voice, and attempting to climb back into the culvert. For the first time that night, laughter rose across the snow. Even Levi let out a breath that sounded close to one. Scout approached Morrow carefully. The old cat stared at him, offended by the existence of dogs, emergencies, and weather. Scout sniffed once, then stepped aside with the patience of a creature accustomed to unreasonable civilians. Amos was taken to the community care room beside Cole Mercy Church. Levi followed in his truck with Scout beside him. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and old radiator heat. Meredith Sloan met them wearing sage-green scrubs beneath a cream cardigan. She was 49, with chestnut hair tied low and clear hazel-green eyes that missed very little. Widowhood had given her sorrow, but not softness without boundaries. She examined Amos's leg, checked his temperature, and directed the transfer crew with quiet authority. "You can complain after I'm finished," she told him. "I've been complaining longer than you've been nursing." "Then you've had enough practice to wait 5 minutes." Amos looked toward Levi as though requesting intervention. Levi removed the carpenter's pencil from behind his ear. "I'm not suicidal." Meredith nearly smiled. Once Amos was warm and the pain medication began to work, Levi prepared to leave. The rescue was over. The old man was alive. That should have been the end of Levi's responsibility. Amos reached out and caught his wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. "That floor didn't fail on its own," he said. Meredith stopped adjusting the blanket. Amos's eyes had lost their humor. "Heavy trucks have been using the restricted road above the old chamber. Night runs. Months of them. Ground's been shivering under my house." Levi glanced at Scout. "That's a matter for the county." "Maybe." Amos's eyelids lowered. "County don't hear much when money speaks first." His hand slipped from Levi's wrist as sleep finally claimed him. Levi picked up his bag. "Come on, Scout." The German shepherd did not move. He lay across the doorway of Amos's room, head resting on his front paws. The narrow pale mark beneath his right eye made him look sorrowful, but Levi knew the dog well enough to recognize resolve. "Scout?" One ear turned toward him. The rest of the dog remained where it was. Outside the window, daylight began to gather over Cole Mercy. Snow covered the church steps, the neighboring roofs, and the descending road toward Mercy Row. Chimney smoke lifted into the pale morning, carrying the promise of warmth from houses Levi had spent years avoiding. He had told himself that distance was peace. Scout, as usual, appeared unconvinced. Levi looked at Amos sleeping beneath the wool blankets. Then he looked at the dog guarding the threshold between one old man and the rest of the world. For years, Levi had believed that staying out of Cole Mercy meant refusing to reopen an old wound. Now Scout had found a heartbeat beneath the snow and placed Levi beside it. The dog was not asking him to become a hero. He was asking him not to walk away. By 9 in the morning, Cole Mercy looked as though the night had done nothing worse than decorate it. Fresh snow softened the roofs along Main Street and filled the cracks in the old brick sidewalks. Evergreen wreaths hung from shop doors. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight gray columns before bending east over the valley. The red brick church stood above the lower road, its white steeple catching the pale winter sun. From the community care room, Levi could see nearly all of it. Scout still lay across Amos Tully's doorway. "You've made your position clear," Levi told him. Scout opened one amber eye. Meredith Sloan moved past carrying a tray of bandages and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. She had changed from her cream cardigan into a heavier sage-colored sweater, but her chestnut hair remained tied low at the nape of her neck. "He's not the stubborn one in that doorway," she said. Levi looked at her. Meredith nodded toward the dog. "Scout has a reason." "And I don't?" "I'm sure you have several. Most people do when they want to leave before breakfast." Amos stirred beneath 2 wool blankets. His injured leg had been stabilized and elevated. The county clinic had confirmed there was no major fracture, only severe bruising and a strained knee. At 81, that was enough to keep a man still, though Amos appeared personally offended by the concept. Morrow occupied a folded towel near the radiator. The gray cat had eaten half a dish of tuna, rejected the other half as beneath him, and now watched Scout with the expression of an aristocrat forced to share a train compartment. Levi picked up his canvas bag. "Amos is safe. You have my number." Meredith did not stop him. "Before you go, walk with me." "That sounds like stopping me." "It's a hallway, Levi, not an ambush." She led him past the small chapel and through a side door into the church's lower wing. The air changed there. It smelled less of antiseptic and more of coal dust, cardboard, and old stone. A storage room had been converted into a winter supply station. Bags of rice and canned goods were stacked along one wall. On the other side, Black coal filled a row of reinforced bins beneath hand-painted signs bearing household names and delivery dates. Some names had red marks beside them. Levi noticed because he noticed systems. Red meant interruption, warning, or failure in nearly every language worth trusting. What are those? Delayed applications, Meredith said. For coal? For the Winter Hearth Fund. She pulled a clipboard from a hook. Black Fern Energy's dark green fern logo appeared at the top of every form. Beneath it, in warm lettering, were the words, "Keeping Coal Mercy Warm." The company donates heating coal through the church, she explained. Gideon manages distribution. It started after the county cut its emergency fuel budget. Levi studied the names. Most belong to older residents of Mercy Row. Why are they delayed? Some are missing income forms, some supposedly need new property verification. Meredith's mouth tightened. And some complained about their wells. Levi looked up. She did not rush to fill the silence. What kind of complaints? Metal taste, orange residue in filters, nausea, headaches, numb hands. She returned the clipboard to its hook. I'm a nurse, not an environmental investigator. I'm not telling you what caused any of it. But you think they're connected. I think 3 people on the same road should not develop the same strange symptoms and be told they all need better vitamins. A furnace kicked on somewhere behind the wall. Warm air passed through the room, carrying a faint mineral smell. Levi touched the edge of one coal bin. The black pieces glittered under the overhead light. Why hasn't anyone reported it? They have. And? Inspections were scheduled. Letters were answered. Samples were taken by people hired by the company. Meredith gave him a tired look. Everything came back within acceptable limits. Levi knew that phrase. It had protected defective equipment, bad commanders, and decisions made far from the people who paid for them. Scout appeared at the doorway behind them. Apparently, Amos had released him from guard duty. Morrow followed 3 paces behind, not because he cared where Scout went, but because he objected to being excluded from anything. Meredith glanced at both animals. There goes medical confidentiality. The door at the far end opened, and a broad, round-shouldered man entered, carrying a ring of keys large enough to open a medieval prison. Gideon Marsh was 67, with short silver hair, a small white beard beneath his chin, and cheeks reddened by the cold. He wore a forest green flannel shirt under a brown wool vest. He stopped when he saw Levi. "Well," Gideon said, "either God answers prayers or my coal inventory has finally attracted armed supervision." "I'm not armed." "That puts you ahead of half the deacons I've known." Gideon offered his hand. Coal dust darkened the lines of his palm. Before Levi could take it, the older man wiped it carefully against his work pants. "I heard what happened to Amos. You and Scout did good work. The rescue team did the work." "Of course." Gideon's eyes moved to Scout. "And the dog filed the paperwork." Scout sat down. "That is exactly the face of a bureaucrat," Meredith said. For a moment, the room became lighter. Then Gideon noticed the clipboard missing from its usual position. "You showed him the delays." "I showed him a clipboard," Meredith said. "The delays were already on it." Gideon sighed and set his keys on the desk. Black Fern reviews eligibility. They supply the coal. They set the rules. "You distribute it," Levi said. "Yes?" "So when they delay someone, you're the one who tells an 80-year-old widow her stove stays cold." The words came out harder than Levi intended. Gideon did not defend himself. That made the accusation land more heavily. "I tell her we are working on it," he said. "Then I move coal from another household's allocation and pray nobody counts before spring." Levi looked again at the marked names. The system was not clean. Neither was the man trapped inside it. A cane tapped against the stone floor behind them. Amos stood in the doorway with one hand on the wall and the other gripping a borrowed wooden cane. Scout immediately rose and moved close to his injured side. Meredith's expression sharpened. "You were told to stay in bed." "I stayed long enough to develop a deep spiritual objection to it." "You've been out for perhaps 40 seconds. Felt biblical." Scout positioned himself beside Amos's right leg. When the old man's hand began to tremble around the cane, the dog lifted his muzzle beneath Amos's wrist. The movement was quiet and practical. Amos's fingers settled against Scout's head. No one commented on it. Levi understood why. Naming certain mercies could embarrass them into disappearing. Amos looked at the coal bins. "You tell him yet?" "Not all of it," Meredith said. "Then we ought to stop behaving like sinners, waiting for the sermon." Gideon closed the storage room door. Amos eased himself into a chair and waited until Scout lay beside him. Morrow jumped onto a nearby box, turned twice, and sat with his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. "The old tunnels run under Mercy Row," Amos began. "Not directly beneath every house, but close enough. Most are mapped. One isn't." Levi leaned against the desk. "Why not?" "Because it was a survey chamber, not a production seam, built for measurements and ventilation tests. When the mine closed, the company sealed the main entry and left the side access off the public plans." "You remember where it is?" Amos gave him a look. "I remember the angle of every bad ceiling that ever tried to kill me." Meredith placed a fresh cup of water within his reach. "For 6 months," Amos continued, "I've seen black fern tankers using the ridge road after midnight. They go toward the old chamber. Come back lighter." Gideon's keys shifted beneath his hand. "You're certain they're black fern vehicles?" "Green mark on the cab, fern on the rear doors. Unless somebody started a very specific criminal gardening club." Levi did not smile. "What would they put down there?" "If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here offering guesses." Amos's bluntness made the answer more credible. He reached for the water. His fingers shook hard enough to ripple the surface. Scout lifted his muzzle again, supporting the old man's wrist until the cup steadied. Amos drank, then rested his palm briefly between the dog's ears. "I used to think I was keeping watch," he said. "Turns out I was mostly keeping notes no one wanted." Levi heard the shame beneath the humor. Before he could respond, the outside door opened and a blast of cold air swept through the hallway. A man entered carrying a portable oxygen tank in a faded denim bag. Virgil Boone was 74, short but wide through the shoulders, despite the illness that had thinned his neck and face. White hair showed beneath an old miner's union cap. Clear tubing ran beneath his nose. He wore a quilted brown jacket over denim overalls and moved with the stubborn care of someone determined not to let his lungs dictate the rhythm of his day. His pale blue eyes went first to Amos. "So this is where you're holding court." "Virgil," Amos said. Virgil saw Levi next. His expression changed from irritation to distrust. "Hollis's boy. Levi Barrett." "I know who you are." Virgil set his oxygen bag beside a chair. "Word is, Amos fell through rotten boards and woke up blaming Black Fern." "I blamed their trucks," Amos said. "The company's character is doing the rest without my help." "You don't know what those trucks carry." "Neither do you." "I know the company keeps this town working." Virgil's breath shortened with the force of his words. Meredith stepped closer, but he waved her away. "My daughter has a job in their accounting office. My oxygen is paid through their employee family plan. Half the homes down Mercy Row heat with their coal." He looked directly at Levi. "You come back after years away, find one broken floor, and now we're supposed to burn the whole town down for you?" Levi could have answered with anger. The old instinct arrived quickly, offering clean sentences and sharp edges. Instead, he looked at the oxygen tube beneath Virgil's nose. No one said anything about burning the town. Not yet. Virgil turned toward Amos. And what happens if you're wrong? Property values drop. Inspectors come. The mine shuts every contract in the county. Folks who own nothing but a little house discover it's worth less than the dirt underneath. The dirt may be the problem, Amos said. Virgil's face tightened. The silence that followed was not empty. It contained mortgages, medical bills, widows' stoves, adult children employed by the company, and the humiliating arithmetic of survival. Levi had seen fear disguised as hostility before. Fear wore whatever face a man could live with. Scout rose and walked toward Virgil. The older man stiffened. "Keep that dog back." Scout stopped several feet away. Then Virgil coughed. The first cough bent him slightly. The second folded him over the chair. He reached for the valve on his oxygen tank, but his hand missed it. Meredith moved immediately. Scout did not crowd her. He lowered himself beside Virgil's boots and stayed there while Meredith adjusted the tubing and checked the flow. Virgil's breathing gradually slowed. When he looked down, Scout's head rested near the toe of his boot. "Don't start," Virgil muttered. Scout blinked. "I don't need a furry nurse." Gideon poured coffee into his dark blue thermos. "This one works cheaper than Meredith." "Everyone does," Meredith said. Virgil's mouth twitched despite himself. The tension did not vanish, but it changed shape. No one had won. No one had surrendered. They had simply remembered that an argument was taking place inside a room full of people who could still stop breathing. Later, after Amos returned reluctantly to bed, Levi drove down Mercy Row with Scout in the passenger seat. The neighborhood curved along the lower slope beneath the old mine. Small houses stood close together, each with a narrow porch and a coal shed behind it. Snow made them look cheerful from a distance. Up close, Levi saw rust stains beneath outdoor faucets, dead winter gardens, patched furnace vents, and orange residue along the edges of several drainage ditches. A black fern delivery truck stood outside a pale green house. Two workers emptied coal into a shed while an elderly woman signed a clipboard. The company's fern logo looked almost festive against the snow. Levi kept driving until the road climbed toward the industrial gate. Black Fern Energy occupied what had once been the mine's equipment yard. New security fencing surrounded old brick buildings. Floodlights shone over parked tankers, plow trucks, and a line of black storage containers. Clay Varden stood beside the gatehouse. He wore a gray work shirt beneath a Navy security vest, heavy black utility pants, and brown safety boots. At 51, Clay was shorter than Levi, but heavier through the chest. His reddish-brown beard had gone gray along the jaw, and a scar broke the line of his left eyebrow. Hollis's old silver ring remained on his right hand. Clay watched Levi park. Neither man approached quickly. Scout stepped down from the truck and stood at Levi's left side. His body remained loose, but his attention fixed on Clay. "I heard about Amos," Clay said. "He's alive." "Good." Levi looked past the gate toward the tankers. Clay noticed. "You came to ask about the trucks." "I came because an 81-year-old man fell through a floor beneath a road that's carrying more weight than it was built for. We have permits." "For night traffic?" "For operations." "That wasn't my question." Clay's jaw shifted. Snow moved between them in small dry grains. "You always did like questions with only one acceptable answer," Clay said. "You always did like answers broad enough to hide inside." Scout glanced between them. Clay's hand moved toward the ring Hollis had once worn, but he stopped himself before touching it. "You think Black Fern is poisoning people?" he asked. "I think people are sick. I think trucks are using a restricted road. I think the company deciding who gets heating coal creates a reason for people not to complain." Clay looked toward Mercy Row below. "You know what happens if Black Fern closes?" Tell me. 200 jobs disappear. The county loses tax money. Winter Hearth loses its supplier. People who can barely afford groceries start choosing which room to heat. You make that sound like generosity. I make it sound like West Virginia. For the first time, Clay's anger showed, not polished, not defensive, but tired. You left, he said. Hollis got sick, and you left me with decisions nobody should have had to make. The hospital wanted money. The roof needed replacing. The road agreement paid for both. You signed away access to family land. I kept him alive 11 months longer. The words struck cleanly. Levi had no answer that did not injure someone already dead. Clay continued more quietly. You got to love Hollis from a distance. I had to decide what keeping him alive cost. Scout took one step forward and sat between the men, not blocking either one. Clay looked down at him. He still does that? What? Plants himself where the worst decision is about to happen. Levi remembered 2 boys arguing in Hollis's barn, Scout not yet born, the space between them occupied by a father who believed any quarrel could be repaired before supper. Some distances took longer. Clay looked back at the facility. I don't know what every tanker carries, he admitted. Security verifies authorization, not contents. But if you start something you can't prove, the people who suffer first won't be men in offices. That your warning? That's me telling you the truth. Levi studied him. Clay believed what he was saying. That was more troubling than a lie. Behind the fence, a tanker engine started. Its low vibration traveled through the frozen ground. Scout's ears lifted, and his head turned toward the sound. Levi placed a hand against the dog's shoulder. Below them, smoke rose from Mercy Rose chimneys. Every warm house appeared peaceful from the ridge. Every stove was burning something the company had chosen to provide. Levi had wanted a clean enemy and a clean duty. Instead, he found a town being held together by the same hands that might be harming it. Black Fern had not chained Cole Mercy with threats. It had given the chain a furnace, a paycheck, and a charitable name. Clay stood at the gate believing he was keeping people safe. Levi looked down at Scout, then toward the houses below. The hardest prisons were not built from iron. They were built from things people could not afford to lose. Pine Ledger Cemetery kept its own weather. The road below was bright with morning traffic and chimney smoke, but the hilltop remained pale and still beneath a thin veil of falling snow. Wind moved through the bare branches with the hush of pages turning. Rows of gravestones climbed the slope in uneven lines, some polished and recent, others worn down until names looked less engraved than remembered. From the highest ridge, Mercy Row could be seen below. Its small houses sat close together beneath the abandoned mine works, their roofs white and their chimneys smoking steadily. Beyond them, Black Fern's fenced yard stretched across the lower ground, its new steel buildings planted among the brick remains of an older industry. Levi parked beside a maintenance shed near the cemetery gate. Scout climbed down first and paused in the snow, nose lifted. He wore only his dark leather collar, the scratched brass tag resting against his chest. The hill was quiet enough that the tag's small movement sounded like a distant tool striking stone. Meredith stepped out of the passenger side, carrying a leather medical bag and a folder of consent forms. Amos had wanted to come, but his injured knee had made the decision for him. He had sent a hand-drawn list of surnames instead, along with several complaints about everyone else's handwriting. The cemetery manager was waiting beside a line of cedar trees. Lenora Pike stood tall and narrow in a dark waxed coat that nearly reached her knees. Her silver hair was braided low against her back, and a small pin shaped like a pine branch fastened her collar. She held a blue-black ledger against her chest with gloved hands. She did not wave. "Levi Barrett," she said when they reached her. Her voice was low and exact, as though she did not waste syllables any more than she wasted flowers. "Yes, ma'am." "You have your mother's eyes when you're trying not to believe something." Levi stopped. Meredith glanced at him, but did not ask. Lenora turned toward the rows of graves. "Come inside. Wind makes people sentimental, and sentiment is poor record-keeping." The cemetery office occupied one side of the maintenance shed. It contained a desk, a wood stove, shelves of burial registers, and a narrow window overlooking the slope. No framed prayers hung on the walls. Instead, there were maps divided into numbered plots and a row of sharpened pencils arranged by length. Scout settled near the stove. Lenora removed her gloves, revealing long fingers marked by sun and cold. She opened the ledger. "My job is to know who is buried here, where they came from, and who is likely to visit them," she said. "It is not to diagnose disease or accuse companies." "Good," Levi replied. Lenora looked at him. That was not reassurance. It was a boundary. Meredith placed her folder on the desk. "Boundaries are useful." "They are especially useful around men who believe concern grants authority." Levi removed the red carpenter's pencil from behind his ear and placed it beside the register. "I'm listening." Lenora's expression softened by perhaps half a degree. She began with names. Mabel Corwin, 76, Mercy Row, kidney failure. Dale Ransom, 68, chronic lung disease complicated by neurological symptoms. Walter and June Pritchard, both from the southern end of the neighborhood, their deaths 14 months apart. Besides some entries, Lenora had written brief notes in small, clean script. Family reported orange water, sold house before moving, repeated nausea, furnace pipes replaced twice. Meredith read without touching the pages. "These aren't medical records," she said. "No," Lenora answered. "They are what families say while deciding what to put in an obituary. Which means they may be incomplete. They may also be the only thing anyone bothered to write down." Levi stood by the window, looking downhill toward Mercy Row. From this distance, the neighborhood appeared almost peaceful. The snow covered ditches, broken fences, and stains beneath outdoor taps. "How far back do the notes go?" he asked. 11 years. The complaints become more frequent around 6 years ago." "That's when Blackfern expanded the stabilization work," Meredith said. Lenora closed the ledger. "Do not make the evidence serve the conclusion before it earns the privilege." Meredith nodded. "Agreed." The two women understood each other quickly. Both had spent years around people who confused certainty with strength. Lenora unlocked a cabinet and removed several thinner burial registers. She laid them beside the first book, then placed Amos's handwritten list on top. "He remembered 7 names," she said. 4 are here. 2 were cremated elsewhere. 1 is still alive and will be angry Amos buried him early." "That sounds like Amos," Levi said. Lenora's mouth moved faintly at one corner. Meredith began marking names that might correspond to families whose permission she could request. The process was slow. Dates had to be checked, addresses confirmed, relatives identified. Nothing in the room offered the satisfaction of a dramatic discovery. It was patient work, the kind that required humility, because most answers remained incomplete. Scout wandered to the doorway and sat facing the graveyard. Levi watched him for a moment. The dog did not scratch, bark, or signal some hidden truth. He simply watched the falling snow settle over the names. It struck Levi that Scout understood the place better than many living people would. A cemetery was not frightening to a dog. It was ground-holding the scent of those who had come and gone, surrounded by those who still remembered them. Lenora followed Levi's gaze. "Your mother liked that ridge," she said. He looked back at her. "I don't remember much about her." "You were young." 8. Old enough to remember more than adults think, young enough to distrust what remains. Lenora moved to another cabinet and drew out a cardboard archive box. Levi's shoulders tightened. She noticed. "This is not a secret inheritance," she said. "There are no bonds, no confession, and no map to buried money." Meredith hid a small smile. Lenora placed the box on the table. Maintenance records? Inside were invoices, road repair receipts, supply lists, and notebooks whose covers had softened from years of use. Hollis Barrett's name appeared on several. Levi recognized the handwriting immediately. Block letters, practical and slightly slanted, written by a man who believed legibility was a form of respect. Hollis had volunteered at Pine Ledger after retiring from the county road crew. He repaired culverts, removed fallen limbs, and cleared snow before funerals. Levi remembered him coming home with frozen mud on his boots and cedar needles caught in his coat. He had never asked what his father wrote in these books. Lenora handed him one dated 7 years earlier. "Your mother and I used to compare addresses from the old mine clinic," she said. "Men came in coughing black, and everyone assumed coal dust explained everything. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it explained only what people already knew how to see." Levi opened the notebook. The pages contained ordinary work. January 9th, salted East Walk. February 2nd, maple limb removed from Corwin plot. March 18th, drainage ditch blocked after tanker traffic. Levi stopped. Below the entry, Hollis had written a license number. Further down appeared an invoice from Black Fern for damage to the cemetery access road. A second entry 6 weeks later listed another tanker, another rut, another payment. Hollis had recorded times as well: 12:40 a.m., 1:15 a.m., 2:05 a.m. "He was watching them," Levi said. "He was repairing after them," Lenora replied. "Watching came later." Levi turned the page. A folded form had been tucked into the spine. It was an unfinished insurance complaint concerning repeated damage to the cemetery culvert. Most of it dealt with gravel depth, axle weight, and erosion. Near the bottom, Hollis had written, "Clay says they are pumping stabilizing material into the lower rock. I want to trust the boy. I do not understand why the trucks only come at night." There was no signature, no date of submission, no evidence that the complaint had ever left Hollis's hands. Levi read the lines again. The room grew very quiet. For years he had divided the past into simple shapes. Hollis had been the decent man. Clay had been the one who compromised. Levi had been the son who returned too late to stop either of them. The notebook refused that arrangement. Hollis had known enough to question. He had chosen not to ask again. Levi turned another page too quickly and tore the corner. The small sound struck him harder than it should have. Scout raised his head. "Levi," Meredith said. He closed the notebook. Black Fern paid his hospital bills. Lenora did not answer. Clay arranged the road agreement. Hollis knew trucks were moving at night. He wrote it down and did nothing. "He may have believed Clay," Meredith said. "He wanted to believe him." "That is not the same thing. It can do the same damage." Levi stood so abruptly that the chair legs scraped the floor. Scout rose but remained near the stove. Lenora watched Levi without alarm. "Your father was not a monument," she said. "Do not punish him for failing to behave like one. He taught us to tell the truth. People often teach best what frightens them most." Levi looked at her. The sentence was not cruel. That made it worse. He pulled on his gloves and walked outside. Snow had thickened, erasing the tracks they had made from the truck. Levi crossed between the graves without choosing a direction. Names passed beside him, men who had died in mines, women who had outlived them. Veterans, mechanics, nurses, people whose entire lives had been reduced to 2 dates and whatever someone thought worth carving between them. He reached the stone wall at the edge of the cemetery and continued into the trees. Scout followed, not close. The dog stayed 20 feet behind, moving when Levi moved, stopping when he stopped. Levi hated him slightly for understanding. The forest descended toward a frozen creek. Wind shook snow loose from the hemlocks, sending it down in soft collapses. Levi walked until the cemetery disappeared behind the trees. Then he struck the stone wall with the heel of his hand. Pain flashed through his wrist. He did it again. The second blow changed nothing. Hollis remained dead. Clay remained employed by Black Fern. Levi remained the man who had lived far enough away to turn ignorance into innocence. He rested both hands against the cold stone. "You knew enough," he said aloud. He was not sure which of them he meant. Hollis had known enough to question the trucks. Clay had known enough to avoid discussing them. Levi had known enough about Cole Mercy to stay away. The differences mattered, but they no longer protected him. A gust moved through the trees. Levi turned back toward the cemetery and realized one of his gloves was missing. Scout stood several yards uphill with the glove held gently in his mouth. The dog approached, but did not press close. He placed the glove on the snow in front of Levi and lay down beside it. Levi looked at the old silver around Scout's muzzle, the notched right ear, and the patient amber eyes. "You going to tell me what forgiveness is supposed to look like?" Scout rested his chin on his paws. "Useful." The dog's tail moved once against the snow. Levi picked up the glove but did not put it on. He sat on the stone wall. Scout stayed on the ground beside him, near enough to share silence but not demand anything from it. Levi had spent years believing loyalty meant defending the people he loved against every accusation. In the teams he had served with, loyalty meant protecting the man beside you because hesitation could get him killed. But Hollis was beyond saving. Defending his reputation would not warm Mercy Row, clean a well, or undo the choice to look away. Perhaps loyalty to the dead meant refusing to let their worst decision become an inheritance. When Levi returned to the cemetery office, snow covered his shoulders and the red carpenter's pencil was gone from behind his ear. Lenora had set the Hollis notebook apart from the other records. Meredith was copying family contact information, not medical conclusions. The work had continued without him. That, too, felt important. Lenora looked up. "Do you want the notebook?" "No." Her eyebrows lifted. "It belongs here. It's a maintenance record." "And the unfinished complaint?" "Make a copy." Lenora waited. Levi looked at Hollis's handwriting. "I spent years thinking Clay stained what Hollis left behind," he said. "Maybe Hollis left the stain himself." Meredith put down her pen. "That does not make everything he taught you false." "No." Levi's voice steadied. "It means I don't get to use the good parts to hide the rest." Lenora closed the archive box. "What will you do?" Levi glanced through the narrow window. Scout stood among the graves, facing downhill toward Mercy Row. Snow gathered lightly on his black and gold back. "I'm not going to protect Hollis's name by repeating his silence." Lenora studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. It was not approval. Lenora did not hand out absolution. It was acknowledgement. Meredith gathered the list of families whose permission she would need before reviewing any medical records. Lenora returned the burial registers to their shelves. No one claimed they had proved contamination. No one spoke of exposing Black Fern or defeating Clay. They had only found a pattern worth examining and a dead man's record of questions he had not pursued. Yet when Levi stepped back into the snow, Cole Mercy looked different from the hill. The warm roofs below no longer appeared like a town separate from him. They looked like lives his family had helped leave uncertain. Scout came to his side. Levi placed the copied complaint inside his jacket, close enough to feel its edge when he moved. He was no longer walking toward the truth to punish Clay. He was walking toward it because someone in his family should have done so sooner. Levi's first mistake was assuming that truth became useful the moment someone uncovered it. He stood in the church basement with Hollis's copied complaint folded inside his jacket and told Amos they should call a newspaper. Amos sat at the end of a folding table with his injured leg stretched beneath it. A brown cardigan hung loosely over his narrow shoulders, and a plaid blanket covered his knees. Scout lay beside his chair, while Morrow occupied a cardboard box intended for canned peaches. "No," Amos said. Levi waited for an explanation. Amos lifted his coffee with both hands. The tremor in his fingers was worse that morning, though his voice remained steady. "You call reporters now. They'll photograph you in that military shirt, photograph Scout looking noble, and put 3 frightened widows behind you." "That isn't what I'm suggesting." "It is what they'll understand." Meredith stood near the supply shelves, sorting consent forms into separate envelopes. "He's right." Levi turned toward her. "We have residents getting sick, delayed coal applications, night traffic, and Hollis's records." "We have concerns," she replied, "not conclusions." Amos took a careful drink. "And the people who live on Mercy Row are not scenery in your return to righteousness." The words landed precisely because Amos did not raise his voice. Levi looked toward Scout. The dog was watching Morrow steal warmth from a heating vent and appeared unwilling to intervene in another creature's bad decisions. "What do you propose?" Levi asked. "We ask people whether they want to speak," Amos said. "Then we listen when they say no." Over the next week, Gideon Marsh turned the church basement into several different things without officially calling it any of them. On Monday, it was a blood pressure clinic. On Tuesday, it became a furnace maintenance workshop. Wednesday brought food distribution, coffee, and a table where Meredith helped residents review medication schedules. No sign announced an investigation. No crowd gathered at once. People came in 2s and 3s, carrying grocery bags, medical folders, or the cautious expressions of those who had spent years learning that help often came with conditions. Gideon kept the basement warm and supplied cinnamon coffee from his blue thermos. He also developed a habit of standing near the door whenever a black fern truck passed outside. Levi repaired 2 space heaters and a furnace blower, while residents spoke around him. Keeping his hands occupied helped prevent him from asking questions too quickly. Mrs. Della Wren brought a water filter sealed in a plastic bag. Orange crust covered the white mesh. A retired rail clerk named Nathan Cole produced photographs of tomato plants that had blackened from the roots during the previous summer. Another resident had written down the nights she heard tankers shifting gears on the Ridge Road. She had marked each entry beside the phase of the moon because, as she explained, the calendar in her kitchen had no room left. No single item proved anything. Together, they created the uncomfortable shape of a pattern. Meredith never accepted a medical file without a signed release. She explained, sometimes more than once, what information could be shared and what would remain private. "If you change your mind," she told each resident, "the answer becomes no. You do not owe us an explanation." Some people signed. Some took the form home. Several folded it into a pocket and never returned. Levi found that harder to accept than he expected. "They're afraid," he said after one elderly couple left without speaking. "They're also allowed to disagree with us," Meredith replied. "What if silence puts them in danger?" "Then we give them better information. We do not take away their choices in order to save them." Levi looked down at the furnace motor in his hands. He had spent much of his former life making decisions for people in danger because there was no time to ask. Civilian life offered more time and fewer excuses. Dr. Celia Wren arrived on Thursday afternoon in a salt-streaked university vehicle. She was 57, with dark hair threaded heavily with silver and cut bluntly at her jaw. A long charcoal coat covered practical field clothes, and square glasses rested low on her nose. She carried no dramatic equipment, only a hard case, paperwork, and the quiet impatience of someone accustomed to being asked for certainty before the evidence existed. 2 environmental technicians accompanied her. Celia gathered the participating residents around a folding table. "We will sample the wells under a documented chain of custody," she said. "We will test for metals, solvents, and several industrial compounds. A positive result will tell us what is in the water." "Will it tell us who put it there?" someone asked. "No." Disappointment moved through the room. Celia did not soften the answer. To connect contamination to a source, we need hydrogeology, operational records, material samples, and sometimes years of work. Science is useful because it refuses to flatter us. Amos nodded with visible approval. Levi did not enjoy the statement, which was one reason he trusted it. The technicians labeled sterile containers, photographed seals, recorded times, and accompanied each resident to the sampling point. No one was allowed to bring in water already collected in a kitchen jar, no matter how obvious the discoloration appeared. When a woman complained that the process seemed unnecessarily fussy, Celia answered, "The more powerful the accusation, the cleaner the evidence must be." That sentence stayed with Levi. Franklin Yates arrived later that day carrying a rolled map tube and an old white hard hat under one arm. At 69, Franklin had the narrow build of a man who had spent decades fitting himself through places not designed for comfort. His weathered face was square, his pale eyes permanently narrowed, and a heavy silver mustache made every expression appear more disapproving than it probably was. The missing tip of his left middle finger became visible when he shook Levi's hand. "You're the former SEAL," Franklin said. "I used to be." "Good. Mining accidents don't care." He set his equipment on the table and tapped his gas meter twice before switching it off. Amos unfolded his hand-drawn tunnel map. Franklin examined it for nearly 10 minutes without speaking. "You left out the western rise," he said. "It flooded in 82. Still exists. Under 6 feet of orange water. Existence and usefulness are separate matters." Amos looked offended, then pleased. The 2 old men bent over the map and argued in measurements, gradients, and names no longer printed on modern plans. Franklin confirmed that several abandoned workings could intersect fractured rock leading toward Mercy Row. He also made it clear that this possibility did not prove contaminants had traveled along them. When Amos suggested visiting an old access point, Franklin looked over the top of his glasses. "You are 81, recently pulled from beneath a beam, and currently using a cane you resent." "I know the ground." "You can know it from a chair." Amos drew breath to protest. Franklin pointed one incomplete finger at him. "You go underground again without medical and technical clearance, I will personally have this dog sit on you." Scout lifted his head at the mention of his profession. Amos glanced down at him. "Traitor." Scout placed his chin back on his paws. The meetings continued. Scout moved among the folding chairs without begging for food or attention. He stopped beside people who reached toward him and past those who did not. Some residents spoke more easily with one hand resting on his back. Others simply watched him breathe. He did not discover hidden papers. He did something less dramatic and more necessary. He made silence feel less empty. Virgil Boone attended every meeting while insisting he supported none of them. He sat near the door with his portable oxygen tank in its denim carrier and interrupted anyone who spoke too confidently. He questioned Celia's sampling methods, Franklin's maps, Meredith's records, and Gideon's coffee. "The coffee is beyond defense," Gideon admitted. Virgil refused to offer his own well for testing. "If they label my property contaminated, who buys it?" he demanded. "You?" No one answered. "My wife and I paid on that house for 36 years. It is the only thing I have to leave. You all talk about saving people while you're fixing to erase the value of everything they own." His objection divided the room because it was true. A contamination finding could bring aid. It could also make homes unsellable, raise insurance problems, and turn families' only assets into legal disputes. Levi watched several residents withdraw their consent forms. The investigation was not gathering momentum in a heroic line. It advanced, stopped, and sometimes stepped backward. During Friday's meeting, Virgil became unusually quiet. His oxygen machine gave a faint mechanical chirp. He adjusted the tubing, then frowned. A second chirp followed. Meredith crossed the room. "I'm fine." The machine disagrees. "It's temperamental." "So are you. I still check both." Virgil tried to stand and immediately sat again. His breathing shortened, each inhale becoming a smaller room than the last. Meredith knelt beside him and checked the flow regulator. The tubing had kinked beneath the strap of his denim bag. Scout approached, but stopped outside her working space. When Meredith straightened the tube and increased the flow, Scout lowered himself beside Virgil's boots. Virgil pressed one hand to his chest. "Don't make a ceremony out of this," he said between breaths. "No one is," Meredith replied. Scout remained still. The dog's presence did not cure anything. It simply gave Virgil something calm to look at, while his lungs remembered their work. After several minutes, his shoulders lowered. The room began breathing again with him. Virgil stared at Scout. "You're not a doctor." Scout blinked. "You don't even have pockets." A few people laughed, gently enough not to embarrass him. The following morning, Virgil returned carrying a paper grocery bag. He placed it on Meredith's table. Inside were copies of his medical bills, 2 furnace repair invoices, and a signed consent form. "My well gets tested once," he said. "No reporters, no speeches. Nobody puts my face on a donation flyer." Meredith accepted the form. "Those are your conditions." Virgil nodded toward Scout. "And keep that unlicensed nurse away from my lunch." Scout, who had shown no interest in the sandwich, looked mildly insulted. The shift was small. Virgil did not apologize to Amos. He did not declare war on Black Fern. He merely allowed one sample to be taken. Yet Levi understood that real courage sometimes entered a room carrying paperwork in a grocery bag. That evening, Clay sent a message requesting a meeting. Not at Black Fern, not at the church. The abandoned machine shed behind the old county garage stood empty except for a rusted workbench and the smell of frozen oil. Levi arrived with Scout shortly before dark. Clay was already there. His Navy security vest had been replaced by a denim jacket lined with worn fleece. A red and black flannel shirt showed beneath it. Hollis's silver ring caught the weak light as Clay closed the door. "You're collecting water samples," he said. "People are choosing to have their water tested." Black Fern knows something is happening. "Did they send you?" "No." Levi waited. Clay looked older away from the company gate. Tiredness softened the heavy lines of his face, but not the defensiveness in his amber-brown eyes. "I signed overnight access logs," he said. "Tankers listed as stabilization material." "What kind?" "The forms used product codes, security verified authorization, seals, driver identity." "And you never asked?" "I asked once. Wesley Rourke told me it was industrial grout." "Did you believe him?" Clay looked toward the workbench. "I needed to." Levi removed the copied complaint from inside his jacket and handed it over. Clay recognized Hollis's handwriting before reading the words. His face changed, not dramatically. His mouth tightened. His thumb moved automatically across the old silver ring. "He wrote this?" "He didn't send it." Clay read the passage again. "I told him the material was approved." "You told him what the company told you?" I was taking him to chemotherapy twice a week. The hospital was calling about money. Blackfern offered road compensation and medical assistance. You could have checked. Clay looked up sharply. And you could have come home. The accusation filled the shed. Scout sniffed the air near Clay's jacket. His ears angled back. A bitter chemical odor clung to the fabric beneath the more familiar scents of diesel and cold metal. The dog stepped away once. Clay saw it. What does that mean? It means you smell like the yard. Or it means your dog doesn't like me. Scout looked at Clay, then crossed the space and sat between the two men. Neither brother could speak around that simple act without sounding foolish. Clay lowered the paper. I did not know anyone was dumping toxic waste. That isn't the same as not knowing something was wrong. Clay flinched because the words belonged as much to Hollis as to him. You think you're different? He asked. You stayed away because being angry was easier than seeing him die. Levi felt the old answer rise, sharp, defensive, familiar. He let it pass. I was wrong to stay away. Clay had prepared himself for denial. The admission left him briefly unguarded. Levi continued. That does not make your signatures harmless. Clay folded the complaint along its existing crease and handed it back. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. He left without offering more. Scout remained seated until the door closed. 3 days later, Celia called Meredith with the preliminary laboratory results. They gathered in the church basement around the speakerphone. Levi, Amos, Gideon, Franklin, Meredith, and Lenora, who had arrived carrying additional family contact records. Virgil sat near the door, pretending not to be part of the group. Celia's voice came through clearly. 3 wells show elevated concentrations of heavy metals. 2 also show an industrial solvent not expected in untreated groundwater. No one celebrated. Meredith asked for the concentration ranges. Franklin asked about duplicate samples and laboratory blanks. Celia answered each question. Can you link it to Blackfern? Levi asked. No, not from these results alone. Amos unfolded his map. At that moment, Gideon entered, carrying a public notice he had removed from the church bulletin board. Blackfern Energy announced an emergency geological stabilization operation ahead of a major winter storm. Several abandoned mine branches would be sealed or collapsed for public safety. Franklin took the notice and read the listed coordinates. Then he laid it over Amos's map. The old surveyor leaned closer, one trembling finger tracing the lines. They're closing the lower branch, Amos said. The one near the unmapped chamber? Meredith asked. Franklin nodded slowly. If the collapse redirects groundwater through that fracture, he said, Mercy Row's exposure could worsen. And whatever is in that chamber? Levi asked. Amos looked toward the dark basement window. Buried beyond inspection. Outside, snow had begun again, fine and bright beneath the church lamps. The residents had finally agreed to let the truth be tested. Now the ground itself was about to be rearranged. The storm had not arrived yet, but the valley had already begun preparing to disappear. By noon, the western ridges were hidden behind a wall of white cloud. Sunlight still lay across Cole Mercy, bright and cold, making every roof and bare branch look sharpened. Along the road below the old mine, Blackfern equipment moved into position beneath that beautiful sky. Grouting trucks, portable compressors, 2 tracked excavators, a trailer carrying blasting signs and red safety flags. From the church steps, Levi watched the convoy climb toward the industrial yard. Scout stood beside him in an olive rescue harness, though the dog had not yet been cleared to go anywhere near the mine entrance. Reflective gray strips ran along his sides, and black protective boots were clipped to the handle for later. Behind them, the church basement had become a temporary operations room. Maps covered 2 folding tables. Amos sat before them with his injured leg elevated, a short black pencil tucked behind one ear. Franklin Yates stood across from him, comparing the old surveyor's hand-drawn passages with modern stabilization plans. The 2 men had spent an hour disagreeing about a tunnel grade measured before Levi was born. "You're treating subsidence like geometry," Amos said. "It is geometry." "It is geology wearing bad manners." Franklin tapped the page with the blunt end of his pen. "And geology does not improve because you insult it." Gideon carried in a fresh pot of coffee. "Is this helping?" he asked. "No," both old men answered. "Good. I feared peace had broken out." The humor faded when Meredith entered, carrying a printed weather bulletin. "County Emergency Management moved the storm warning forward," she said. "Heavy snow after midnight, ice before dawn. Roads over Laurel Fork may close tomorrow afternoon." Franklin checked his watch. "When is the state inspection team arriving?" "They are leaving Charleston this evening." 4 hours in good weather, Levi said. "Longer with this front," Meredith replied. At the far end of the table, Naomi Kessler closed her phone. She had arrived from a regional legal aid office that morning, wearing a dark tweed blazer beneath a charcoal winter coat. At 52, she carried herself with the compact certainty of someone who had spent years entering rooms where powerful people expected frightened ones. Her black hair, heavily silvered at the temples, touched her shoulders, and square tortoise-shell glasses framed dark, attentive eyes. "The emergency petition has been filed," she said. "We asked the county court to preserve the lower workings until an independent inspection can occur." "Will the judge stop the collapse?" Levi asked. "He may issue a temporary order." "May?" Naomi looked at him over her glasses. "Law becomes less impressive when weather, jurisdiction, and corporate counsel arrive at the same time." She arranged copies of the laboratory report, Hollis's maintenance records, and the public stabilization notice into separate folders. "Nothing leaves this room without being copied, dated, and logged," she continued. "No one confronts Black Fern, no one enters restricted property, and no one posts theories online." Her attention settled on Levi. "You can stop looking specifically at me. I was looking generally in your direction. You have the face of a man preparing to become a procedural problem." Amos gave a dry cough that might have concealed a laugh. Levi folded his arms. "I understand." Naomi capped a green highlighter. "Understanding and compliance are distant cousins. I require both." The church side door opened. Gideon turned, expecting another resident. No one stood there. Cold air moved across the basement floor. On the mat lay a navy work jacket with Black Fern's small fern emblem stitched over the chest. Scout crossed the room. He sniffed the sleeve, then the pockets. His notched ear angled forward. The scent was familiar enough that he looked toward Levi before lowering his nose again. "Clay," Levi said. Gideon studied the jacket. "He came by 3 days ago." "For what?" "Said the electrical cabinet near the coal bins had a damaged lock. Black Fern volunteered to replace it." Naomi approached without touching the coat. "Did you see him leave this?" "No, I found the new lock installed the next morning." Scout moved from the jacket toward the storage room. Levi followed him, but Naomi caught his sleeve. "We document first." She photographed the jacket where it lay, then Gideon put on gloves and lifted it into a clean plastic sack. Scout returned to the storage room door and sat. The electrical cabinet stood behind the last coal bin. Its new padlock looked too bright against the old gray metal. Gideon unlocked it with the key Clay had left in the church office. Inside were breakers, a flashlight, spare fuses, and a folded envelope wedged behind a conduit. Naomi removed it with gloved hands. The envelope contained a photocopied blasting schedule. No signature appeared on the pages, no routing stamp, no indication of who had copied it. But the coordinates did not match Black Fern's public notice. Franklin spread the schedule beside Amos's map. "They moved the eastern shot line," he said. "How far?" Levi asked. "Enough to reach the lower survey branch." Amos leaned forward. "And the old injection chamber." A second discrepancy appeared on the final page. The public operation was scheduled for 48 hours later. The copy listed detonation for the following evening. Gideon looked toward the church ceiling as though he might hear the mountain's clock through stone and timber. "Can this stop them?" he asked. Naomi read every page before answering. "It can support our request. It cannot prove where it came from or whether it is current." "Clay left it," Levi said. "We believe Clay left it. Belief is not provenance. He risked his job. Perhaps, or someone planted false information to draw you onto company property." Levi disliked the possibility because it was sensible. Naomi placed the schedule in a document sleeve. "This is a lead, not permission." The distinction hung in the room. Levi had once lived in a world where bad information could kill a team. Here, bad information could also destroy a case, divide a town, or make frightened residents look reckless. The effect was quieter. It was not smaller. That afternoon, Naomi arranged a call with Earl Danner, a former tanker driver identified through county contracting records. Earl agreed to meet at a roadside diner outside Cole Mercy, far enough from Black Fern that familiar trucks would be noticeable. He arrived 20 minutes late. At 58, Earl was lean and slightly stooped, with gray-blond hair touching the collar of a faded Navy driver's jacket. He kept one long glove on his left hand, even inside the heated diner. When he finally removed it, pale, tightened skin showed along his forearm. "Chemical burn," he said before anyone asked. Coupling leaked. Naomi placed no recorder on the table. She asked whether Earl had driven tankers to Black Fern's lower access road. Yes. What did the manifests identify? Stabilization slurry, industrial grout, different codes. Did you know what the material actually was? Earl rubbed his thumb across the edge of the old burn. I knew it smelled wrong. What does wrong smell like? Levi asked. Earl looked at him. Like paint thinner mixed with hot pennies. Did you report the leak? To dispatch. They sent another truck and told me to wash the sleeve. Do you still have records? Maybe old route texts. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Would you provide a formal statement? Earl's gaze moved toward the window. A Black Fern pickup passed on the highway. No. Mister. Danner. I have insurance through a former contractor settlement. My wife's medication goes through it, too. They can bury me in legal costs before a judge ever sees the truth. You may qualify for whistleblower protections. May? Naomi did not insult him with certainty. Possibly. Earl pulled his glove back over the damaged arm. I'm sorry. He left cash for coffee he had not touched and walked out. Levi watched him cross the icy parking lot. He knows. He fears consequences more than he trusts us, Naomi said. He let trucks carry that material. And now you want him to risk his wife's health to ease your anger. Levi turned toward her. Naomi held his gaze. That does not make his silence right, she said. It makes the cost real. The weather worsened through the evening. Wind pressed snow against the church windows. County crews began salting the main road. Black Fern sent a notice stating that forecasted freeze-thaw instability required accelerating its stabilization work. Naomi read the announcement twice. "They are establishing a safety justification," she said. "Could it be legitimate?" Meredith asked. Franklin answered, "The storm creates genuine risk. That is what makes the timing useful. A lawful operation, a plausible emergency, a route toward a chamber no one outside Blackfern had inspected. The truth was not hidden behind a locked door. It was being buried beneath procedures that looked responsible from a distance." Amos traced the old measurement passage from Pine Ledger Cemetery to the lower branch. "This entry was never used for production," he said. "Survey crews went through it before the western rise flooded." "Condition?" Franklin asked. "Unknown." "Ventilation?" "Poor even then." "Roof support?" "Timber and prayer." Franklin pushed the map away. "No civilians go inside." "I am not suggesting civilians." "Sue, you are suggesting yourself." "I drew half those lines." "And you recently lost a fight with a rotten floor?" Amos's eyes narrowed. Franklin continued before the old man could answer. "You stay at the church. You guide by radio. I take a licensed mine rescue team, gas monitors, and a remote camera." Levi pointed to the cemetery entrance. "Can the camera reach the chamber?" "If the passage is open." "And if it isn't?" "We do not invent a route by getting killed." Franklin looked at Scout next. "The dog goes no farther than the verified safe station near the entrance." Levi nodded. "No argument?" "He's not equipment." Franklin's mustache shifted. "Good. One sensible person in the room." Scout lifted his head as if accepting the distinction. Naomi began making calls. County Emergency Management, the Mine Rescue Coordinator, the State Environmental Unit, and the judge's clerk. Each conversation produced another delay, another condition, another person with authority over only part of the problem. The inspection team remained on the road. The temporary order remained unsigned. Blackfern's accelerated schedule remained active. Near midnight, the church basement emptied except for the core group. Meredith rested in a chair with her coat folded behind her head. Gideon checked the furnace. Amos continued marking the map. Franklin tested the remote camera and gas meter. Levi fitted Scout's protective boots. The dog tolerated the first three and withdrew his fourth paw with quiet disapproval. "You have 4 feet," Levi said. Scout looked away. "It's been confirmed." The outer door opened. Clay stood in the stairwell. Snow covered his shoulders. He wore no company vest, only a red and black flannel shirt beneath a denim jacket. His face looked drained of color, and the scar through his left eyebrow appeared darker against his skin. Naomi rose. "Mr. Varden." "She." Clay noticed the copied schedule on the table. "You found it." "You left it?" she asked. "Yes." "Can you authenticate it?" Clay entered and closed the door. "I copied it from Wesley Rourke's planning binder. Warren Keel approved the revision verbally. The signed version stays in the operations office." Naomi's voice remained even. "Will you state that formally?" Clay hesitated. Levi saw the answer before he gave it. "Not yet." Naomi removed her glasses, cleaned them once, and put them back on. "Then what you brought us remains difficult to use." "I know." "Why come here?" "Because the schedule changed again." Clay crossed to the map and pointed toward the lower branch. "There is a secondary firing line. It isn't on that copy." Franklin's expression hardened. "Purpose?" "To bring down the survey chamber after the main collapse." Amos went still. "Who installed it?" "Wesley used 2 maintenance men. Told them it was a redundancy." "Are they still working underground?" Levi asked. Clay looked at him. 2 men are scheduled to inspect pumps tomorrow afternoon. The revised firing window overlaps their shift. No one spoke for a moment. "Does Wesley know?" Meredith asked. "He wrote the shift." Clay's hand closed around Hollis's silver ring. Months earlier, he explained, a coupling had failed during an overnight transfer. Dark liquid had spilled near the drainage trench. Clay had sealed the area, changed the incident classification to minor equipment fluid, and allowed a contracted crew to remove the soil. "You knew it wasn't ordinary grout," Levi said. "I knew Wesley didn't want it reported." "That wasn't my question." Clay's jaw tightened. "No, I did not know what it was." He swallowed. "But I knew enough to make sure I didn't learn." The words seemed to cost him more than denial had. Scout approached. Diesel, cold steel, and a sharp chemical odor clung to Clay's clothing. The dog paused, stepped back once, then moved between Clay and Levi, and sat down. Clay looked at him. "I don't deserve your help." Scout scratched once at the floor and looked toward the map. Amos gave a tired sigh. Dog has no patience for confession when there's work. Clay almost smiled, but the expression failed before forming. Levi studied the man who had once shared his room, his chores, and Hollis's dinner table. Trust did not return because Clay had brought dangerous information. Love did not erase signatures or silence, but disbelief would not make the second firing line disappear. "I don't trust you," Levi said. Clay nodded as though he had expected worse. "I trust the information enough to verify it." Franklin rolled up the map. "That is all we need tonight." Naomi began documenting Clay's statement as an unverified emergency disclosure. Gideon called the mine rescue coordinator again. Meredith woke fully and prepared medical supplies. Amos moved to the radio table. Outside, the first heavy snow began to fall. The church clock read 12 minutes past 1. Somewhere beneath the white mountain, another clock had already started. This one did not measure hours. It measured how long frightened people could wait before choosing what kind of truth they were willing to survive. By dawn, Cole Mercy had nearly vanished. Snow drove sideways across the valley, erasing fences, road markings, and the lower slopes of Laurel Fork. Power failed twice before sunrise. Each time, the church basement dropped into darkness for 3 long seconds before Gideon's backup generator caught, and the fluorescent lights returned with a nervous hum. The church had become an emergency station. Residents from the houses nearest the subsidence zone slept beneath donated blankets in the fellowship hall. Lenora Pike moved among them with a clipboard, confirming names and addresses as though evacuation were another form of cemetery record-keeping. Gideon organized rides for those still trapped on the lower road. Meredith transformed 2 Sunday school rooms into treatment areas. At the center of the basement, Amos Tully sat before a mind map spread across 3 folding tables. A radio headset covered his white hair. His injured leg rested on a crate, but his hands moved constantly, marking routes, correcting elevations, labeling timber sets from memory. Naomi stood near the stairwell with 2 phones and a stack of legal documents. "The state police have acknowledged the emergency disclosure," she said. "The environmental team is stalled east of the county line. The court order was signed 20 minutes ago, but service on Blackfern is delayed." "Does it stop the blasting?" Levi asked. "Legally, yes." Franklin Yates checked his gas meter and tapped it twice against his palm. "Explosives do not read court orders." Outside, a county mine rescue truck waited beside the church. 2 licensed rescuers had arrived through the storm. Marta Hensley, a compact woman in her early 40s with a steady voice and 15 years of underground rescue work, and Roy Bell, 59, broad-shouldered and deliberate, with the habit of repeating every instruction before acting on it. Neither treated Levi's military experience as qualification. Marta handed him a helmet and self-rescuer. "You follow Franklin's orders underground," she said. "You do not move timber, wiring, or equipment unless directed. If your monitor alarms, you leave." "Understood." "If Clay panics, he leaves." Clay stood nearby in borrowed rescue coveralls, his face gray beneath the harsh lights. I understand. Marta looked at Scout. The German Shepherd wore his olive harness, reflective strips, and black foot protection. A tracking unit had been secured between his shoulders. The dog stays at the verified safe station, she said. Levi nodded. Scout watched him with one ear angled forward. He stays out of the active workings. Good. No one used the word hero. That helped. They entered the old survey passage through a reinforced opening near Pine Ledger Cemetery. Snow struck the stone entrance behind them, but inside the mountain the storm became a distant vibration. The first 100 yards were dry and narrow. Old timber supports rose from the darkness at irregular intervals. Water ticked somewhere beyond the walls. Scout walked close to Levi until Franklin stopped beside a ventilation split. Gas readings remained within safe limits. This is his station, Franklin said. Roy secured a safety line near the wall and remained with Scout as rear support and communications relay. Levi crouched beside the dog. You stay. Scout's amber eyes fixed on him. Levi touched the notch in the dog's right ear. That is an order, not a request. Scout sat. The rest of the team moved deeper. A tracked camera rolled ahead of them, its lights cutting a low tunnel through dust and darkness. Images transmitted through a cable back to the church, where Amos guided them by radio. Timber set 17 should lean toward the east wall, Amos said through Levi's headset. If it is upright, you took the wrong split. Franklin reached the next support and swept his light across it. The timber leaned sharply east. Old man remembers, Franklin said. Amos's voice returned immediately. Old man can still hear. Marta suppressed a smile. They continued toward the lower survey branch. The camera reached a concrete channel running beneath newer pipes. Black residue coated the joints. Farther ahead, its light revealed the rounded side of an industrial tank, partially hidden behind a block wall. Franklin stopped walking. Hold position. The camera advanced another 6 feet. A label came into view, damaged but not destroyed. Hazard markings remained visible beneath a newer product sticker. A discharge pipe ran from the tank into the old mine drainage system. At the church, Naomi began preserving the video feed. Celia Wren, connected remotely by phone, instructed them to capture the label, valves, pipe junctions, and surrounding material without touching anything. Clay stared at the screen mounted on Franklin's portable receiver. I never saw this. No reason security would, Marta said. Clay looked sick anyway. The camera turned toward a second tank. Then Scout barked behind them. The sound traveled through the mine in a series of broken echoes. Levi turned. Roy's voice came over the radio. Scout is reacting to the side vent. Strong airflow from an unmarked branch. He hears something metallic. Franklin examined the map. No branch shown there. Amos answered through static. There was a drainage cut north of the survey room, never finished. Should be sealed. Scout barked again, sharper this time. Roy reported that the dog had lowered himself beside the vent and was scratching toward the sound. Franklin took a handheld detector and moved toward the wall. Marta followed. Behind a layer of newer grout, a narrow gap released cold air. Franklin's light found a dark line running along the floor. Wire. It had been covered with fresh compound to resemble an old cable. Secondary firing lead, he said. Clay's breathing changed. Marta immediately raised her radio. All units withdraw. Possible unlisted explosive circuit. They turned back. A faint click traveled through the rock. Franklin froze. What was that? Levi asked. Relay. The first explosion was not large. It did not need to be. A heavy thump passed through the tunnel, followed by a violent rush of dust. The floor lifted beneath Levi's boots. Timber cracked somewhere ahead, and darkness swallowed the camera feed. Marta shouted for everyone to move. The support behind Franklin collapsed first. A crossbeam fell between him and Levi, forcing Marta and Franklin toward the cemetery exit, while Levi and Clay were pushed into the drainage branch. The ceiling groaned. Levi grabbed Clay's jacket and pulled him beneath a surviving support. "Radio check." Only static answered. Then Franklin's voice cut through. "Levi, report." "Clay and I are separated in the north drainage cut, both mobile. Do not move until we assess stability." A metallic impact sounded farther down the branch. Clay turned toward it. "The maintenance men?" "What?" "Wesley assigned 2 pump inspectors to the lower station. You said they were scheduled for the afternoon." "He moved the shift." Levi stared at him. Clay's face collapsed under the weight of the admission. "He told me to escort them through the security gate. Said he wanted witnesses in the area if the storm caused a collapse." "Witnesses?" Clay shook his head. "A believable accident. I thought he wanted frightened workers and damaged equipment. I did not think he meant—" Another vibration rolled through the passage. Clay stepped backward. The edge of the drainage floor broke beneath him. He dropped with a shout. Levi caught one sleeve but lost his grip. Clay fell into the shallow channel below. A steel frame toppled after him, trapping his lower leg against the concrete. "Clay!" "I'm here." Levi lowered himself to the edge. The channel was only 8 feet down, but the ceiling above it had begun shedding stone. Franklin's voice returned through the radio. "Levi, the main route is failing. Move south toward the emergency ladder." "Clay is trapped." A pause followed. "Condition?" "Steel frame across the leg. Conscious. Possible fracture." Marta came onto the line. "You have approximately 4 minutes before that support becomes unreliable." The emergency ladder stood less than 30 yards away. Levi could reach it. Clay could not. Below, Clay looked up through the dust. "Go." Levi began securing his rope. "I said go." "I heard you." "You get out. Send the team back when it's stable." "It will not be stable." Clay's mouth tightened. "Then at least one of us leaves." Levi tied the rope around a surviving support and tested it. Clay stared at him. "Why?" Levi looked down at the man who had been his brother long before either of them understood how families could fail. "Hollis taught us not to leave the living under the ground." He descended. The steel frame had pinned Clay above the ankle. Levi checked circulation and found it weak but present. The structure was too heavy to lift by hand. Franklin talked him through the available options. "Do not pull the frame directly. Brace the upper corner. Use the rescue bar as a lever. Move it only enough to free the boot." Levi wedged a short support beneath the frame. The rock above them cracked. At the safe station, Scout began barking continuously. Roy held the dog's harness while relaying the sound through the radio. "He's focused on the drainage vent," Roy said. "He still hears you." The barking gave the rescuers a directional reference through the fractured passages. Marta and Franklin began clearing a secondary opening toward the channel. Levi pushed down on the rescue bar. The frame shifted half an inch. Clay cried out. "Again," Franklin ordered. Levi changed the fulcrum and pressed with his full weight. His left shoulder burned with an old injury, but the steel rose. Clay pulled. His boot remained caught. "Leave it," Levi said. He cut the laces and dragged Clay's foot free. The support above them snapped. Levi threw himself over Clay as stones struck the channel. Dust filled his mouth and eyes. Then a light appeared through the broken wall. Marta. She and Franklin had reached the channel from the opposite side. Together they secured Clay in a rescue sling and hauled him out. The 2 pump inspectors were found beyond the next bend, injured by falling debris, but alive. Roy and the backup team guided them toward the safe station. Scout remained exactly where Levi had left him. When Levi emerged from the drainage cut, the dog surged forward but stopped at the limit of Roy's grip. Levi knelt and put both hands against Scout's neck. "I know." The dog pressed his forehead into Levi's chest. Behind them, the mine shuddered again. The remote camera feed vanished, but not before Naomi's recorder at the church captured the tanks, hazard labels, discharge pipes, and concealed chamber walls. The lower branch collapsed minutes after the last rescuer cleared the entrance. Back at the church, the fellowship hall fell silent when Clay was carried inside. Meredith cut open the lower leg of his coveralls and examined the swelling. His shoulder was also badly strained, but he remained conscious. Residents watched from their cots and folding chairs. Clay saw the fear in their faces. He raised one hand. "This was not a storm collapse," he said. His voice shook. There was a second firing circuit. Meredith placed a mask over his face. "That is enough talking." Naomi had already contacted the state police. Clay was transferred to the county hospital as soon as a plow cleared the road. His formal statement occurred hours later in a treatment room, with Naomi, an independent attorney, and 2 state investigators present. Clay surrendered his work phone, access card, and stored messages with Wesley Rourke. He described the rerouted tankers, the altered incident report, and the instructions concerning the maintenance workers. Naomi contacted Earl Danner again. This time, when Earl learned Clay had provided his own records and accepted criminal exposure, he agreed to speak with investigators. He confirmed that waste had been transported under false stabilization codes and supplied old dispatch messages stored on a damaged phone. The case still had gaps, but it now had a chain: contaminated wells, mine maps, access logs, transportation records, video from the chamber, Clay's admission, and Earl's independent account. Levi did not sit beside Clay while he gave his statement. He waited in the hospital corridor with Scout lying across his boots. Through the closed door came the muted rhythm of questions and answers. Scout lifted his head once. Levi rested a hand behind the dog's torn ear. "He has to carry this part himself." The door remained closed. For once, Levi did not mistake distance for abandonment. He had pulled Clay out of the mountain. He would not pull him out of the truth. After the storm, sunlight returned without apology. It struck the snow on Cole Mercy's roofs, fences, and church steps until the whole valley glittered with a brightness that hurt the eyes. Icicles hung from the abandoned tipple. Plow ridges rose along Main Street like low white walls. Beyond Mercy Row, yellow evidence tape moved in the wind around Black Fern's silent equipment yard. The machines had not disappeared. They had simply stopped. State police vehicles blocked the mine road. Environmental investigators worked beneath temporary shelters near the sealed entrance. Black Fern's local operation had been suspended while state and federal agencies examined the underground chamber, transportation records, altered blast plans, and the injuries caused by the unauthorized firing circuit. Warren Keel and Wesley Rourke were under investigation. Several company offices had been searched. Attorneys began issuing statements before the snow had finished falling. Black Fern denied knowingly disposing of hazardous material. The company blamed contractors, incomplete records, outdated mine maps, and unauthorized decisions made by local employees. No one in Cole Mercy mistook those statements for surrender. Naomi Kessler warned the residents that the case could last years. "Suspension is not a verdict," she told them during a meeting at the church. "An investigation is not compensation, and a strong case can still move slowly enough to feel like injustice." The room received that truth without enthusiasm. People had spent too long living beneath promises to applaud another one. For the first weeks, county tankers delivered clean water to Mercy Row. Blue containers appeared beside porches and kitchen doors. Dr. Celia Wren's university team expanded its sampling grid while state health officials opened a voluntary screening program. Meredith did not become the town's sole medical savior. She refused. Instead, she coordinated appointments, maintained consent forms, and helped residents understand which tests were being offered. Visiting nurses and physicians rotated through the church clinic. Every patient received copies of their own records. "No one's body becomes evidence before it remains their body," Meredith told a county administrator who wanted faster access to the data. The administrator learned not to argue twice. The Winter Hearth Fund ended within days of Blackfern's suspension. For one frightening afternoon, Cole Mercy had proof of wrongdoing and no confirmed fuel source for the next cold front. That was when the old system revealed how thoroughly it had made dependence look like generosity. Gideon Marsh stood in the church coal room, staring at bins that would soon be empty. "I spent years thanking them," he said. Levi was replacing a damaged hinge on the rear delivery door. "You were trying to keep people warm. I let them decide who deserved warming." "You know that now." Gideon rubbed coal dust between his palms. "Knowing late is a poor cousin to doing right early." Levi looked up from the hinge. Hollis would agree. Neither man said more. The county negotiated an emergency contract with a mining cooperative 2 counties east. Its coal cost more, but the invoices were public, and the delivery lists were controlled by a new oversight board rather than a corporate charity office. Virgil Boone joined that board. He did not do it because he had become Levi's supporter. At the first meeting, he arrived with his oxygen tank, union cap, and 3 handwritten objections to the county's distribution formula. "You people keep saying need-based," he told the commissioners. "Define need. Is it income, medical condition, house size, number of rooms? You start using soft words and somebody gets frozen at the hard edge." No one could accuse him of gratitude. That was one reason the residents trusted him. Virgil continued worrying that the contamination investigation would destroy property values. He worried about his daughter's employment records being examined. He worried that outsiders would speak of Mercy Row as if every house were already condemned. But he also insisted that no official, lawyer, veteran, or church committee speak for the residents without them present. "You want our testimony," he said. "You make room for our chairs." The sentence became an unofficial rule. Lenora Pike began digitizing Pine Ledger's burial notes with assistance from the county archive. She refused to call the project a memorial. "Memorials remember after the danger," she said. "Records can warn before it." Family statements remained carefully separated from verified medical findings, but addresses, dates, and publicly available causes of death helped health researchers identify patterns worth examining. Amos Tully found a different use for his recovery. He established a weekly map workshop at the church. The first class attracted 6 retired miners, 3 widows, 1 former survey technician, and Virgil, who claimed he was there only to prevent Amos from teaching nonsense. Amos taught them how to read contour marks, identify subsidence cracks, and compare modern roads with abandoned workings. His hands still trembled, but when they rested on a map, the lines steadied him. Scout attended every class. He usually slept beneath Amos's chair until someone argued too loudly. Then one amber eye opened, and the room remembered its manners. Knowledge that had once been dismissed as old men's recollection became part of the county's emergency planning. The past was no longer being worshipped. It was being made useful. Clay Varden remained in a medical facility while his leg and shoulder healed. The state charged him with falsifying security records, concealing an industrial leak, and obstructing earlier inspection efforts. His cooperation reduced the likelihood of more serious conspiracy charges, but it did not erase what he had done. Levi visited him 2 weeks before the preliminary hearing. The room overlooked a parking lot rimmed with dirty snow. Clay sat upright in a wheelchair, one leg braced, and his injured arm supported in a sling. Without his beard trimmed and his security keys at his belt, he looked less like a company man and more like the boy who used to sleep in the lower bunk at Hollis's house. That resemblance did not make the past simpler. Clay turned Hollis's silver ring around his finger. "My lawyer says the prosecutor will ask whether I came forward because I grew a conscience or because I knew they were setting me up. What will you say?" "Both." Levi nodded. "That is probably the truth." Clay stared at the window. "I keep thinking about the pump workers. They survived. They survived because other people went back for them. That does not remove your part." "I know." The answer carried no defense. For a while, only the heating vent spoke. Then Clay asked, "Did you pull me out because I was still your brother?" Levi looked at him. The question contained hope, shame, and the old childish belief that family could serve as a verdict. "I pulled you out because you were alive," Levi said. "What we are after that, you have to stay alive long enough to find out." Clay's face tightened. There was no embrace. Levi did not promise to attend every hearing. Clay did not ask for forgiveness again. But when Levi rose to leave, Clay removed Hollis's ring. He held it out. "You should have this." Levi did not take it. "Hollis gave it to you." "He thought I was the one who stayed." "You were." Clay looked down at the ring. "So was he wrong?" Levi considered the question. "Staying in a house is not the same as standing by what is right." Clay closed his fingers around the silver. "No," he said, "it isn't." Levi left the ring with him, not as a reward, as a weight Clay had chosen to carry. Levi returned to Laurel Fork and reopened Hollis's old repair shop. The building stood beside the cabin beneath a roof newly reinforced against snow. He cleaned the benches, replaced 2 windows, and restored the hand-painted sign that had once read "Barrett Repair," generators, heaters, small engines. He hung Hollis's copied maintenance entry on the wall near the tool cabinet. Not the original. That remained at Pine Ledger. The page did not function as a shrine. It was a warning written in the handwriting of a good man who had chosen not to ask one more question. Customers began coming up the mountain again. Some brought furnaces damaged by contaminated water. Others brought generators neglected during the storm. Levi charged what people could pay and wrote the rest in a notebook no corporation controlled. He did not call it charity. Neither did they. Amos stayed at Levi's cabin while his house underwent foundation inspection. Morrow came with him. The old gray cat claimed the wool blanket near the stove within 11 minutes of arrival and immediately treated Scout as a disappointing member of staff. Scout tolerated theft of the blanket, the water bowl, and 1 piece of chicken. He drew the line at his bed. Morrow slept there anyway. One clear morning, Levi entered the workshop kitchen and found them stretched together in a rectangle of sunlight. Scout's black and gold body curved around the smaller gray animal. Morrow's head rested against Scout's silvering muzzle. Scout opened one eye. Levi quietly backed out. A man had to protect the dignity of those who trusted him. The first coal distribution under the new system took place in late February. The morning was cold, but the sky shone deep blue above the church. Snow still covered the yard, packed hard beneath truck tires and work boots. No black fern banners hung from the fence. No photographer arranged the residents into grateful rows. A county clerk checked names against the public eligibility rules. Residents confirmed their own allocations. Gideon managed the bins, while volunteers helped load coal only when asked. Some older residents carried a single bucket themselves before allowing anyone to take the second. The gesture was inefficient. It was also theirs. Virgil sat at the registration table, correcting forms in red ink. Lenora recorded household addresses for emergency planning. Meredith checked on anyone breathing too hard in the cold. Celia's team distributed updated water testing schedules. Amos sat on the church steps with a plaid blanket over his knees. Scout stood beside him, harness removed, brass tag shining against his chest. His honey gold fur caught the winter sun. The black saddle across his back looked almost blue in the brightness. Levi watched from near the delivery truck. For months, Scout had stood beside people at thresholds, beside Amos under the snow, beside Virgil when his breath failed, between Levi and Clay when anger tried to become the only language left. The dog had never solved the town's problems. He had simply refused to leave while human beings remembered what courage required. Amos rested his old hand on Scout's head. "Sometimes God sends a dog," he said, "not to perform a miracle, just to remind people not to be cowards." Scout leaned slightly into his palm. Levi heard the words, but did not answer. Below the church, Mercy Row stretched through the white valley. Clean water tanks stood beside porches. Survey markers dotted the roadside. The houses remained occupied, uncertain and warm. There would be hearings. There would be medical bills, legal delays, and arguments about responsibility. Some wells might never be trusted again. Some families would leave. Some would stay and resent the cost of staying. Justice had not arrived as a shining door thrown open. It had arrived as work, public records, signed forms, fuel deliveries, difficult testimony, people keeping watch over systems that had once asked them to look away. Scout lifted his head toward the road. His ears came forward. He was still guarding something, but not a buried chamber, not a wounded man beneath the ground. He was guarding a promise the town had finally spoken where everyone could hear it. No one's heat would be purchased with silence again. Sometimes courage is not found in the loudest voice or the strongest hands. It is found in the moment we choose not to look away. Levi could not undo the silence of the past, but he could refuse to pass it on. And Scout reminded an entire town that compassion means little unless it is followed by action. In our own lives, we may never face a collapsing mine, but we all meet moments when comfort asks us to stay silent and conscience asks us to stand. What choice in this story stayed with you? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God give you the wisdom to recognize what is right and the strength to remain beside those who need you.